As surgeons, we care for injured patients regardless of their background, socioeconomic position, political affiliation, or combatant status. For trauma surgeons, injury prevention is a core mandate, and war is one of the greatest threats to global health. The prevention of war, therefore, is a critical form of injury prevention and should be a priority for all trauma surgeons. Our paper addresses the ethical responsibilities of surgeons in conflict zones that extend far beyond the operating room. The 4 principles at the core of medical ethics are autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, and justice. In conflict settings, surgeons must balance individual patient care with population health, navigate resource scarcity, and uphold justice by advocating for the protection of civilians and healthcare workers. This paper was written by the Surgical Ethics and Crisis Response Collaborative, a group of surgeons, ethicists, and legal experts committed to providing ethical guidance during humanitarian crises. One of the most challenging aspects of working in conflict zones is that surgeons witness acts that may constitute international crimes. But often we lack the guidance on how to respond. Anjli, as a legal expert, can you explain what protections exist for healthcare workers when we're in conflict zones and what happens when those protections are violated? And also, what responsibility do we have as healthcare workers when working in these conflict zones?
Thanks, Tanya. Under international humanitarian law, healthcare has special protections, so medical facilities, transportation, and personnel may never be targeted. But in practice, these protections are violated repeatedly. Surgeons working in conflict zones often become among the only witnesses to potential war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. In peacetime, we'd report such violations to authorities. In war zones, often those systems don't exist. This creates an ethical imperative. Surgeons must document what they witness, but we lack proper frameworks to do this safely and effectively. While tools like the Istanbul Protocol on Torture and the International Criminal Court's guidelines for civil society exist, healthcare-specific protocols are underdeveloped. We need standardized approaches that address informed consent, protect patient safety, ensure data integrity, and acknowledge the limitations of what surgeons can reliably observe. When done responsibly, documentation allows surgeons to advocate for justice and accountability, extending our duty of care far beyond the operating room.
Thank you, Anjli. Let's hear from our co-authors.
I'm Rishi, a trauma surgeon at Legacy Emmanuel Medical Center in Portland, Oregon. Modern conflicts today often involve asymmetric warfare, where one side has an overwhelming military, technological, and economic advantage. Such drastic power imbalances typically result in disproportionate civilian casualties among the most vulnerable, as well as targeted destruction of critical infrastructure such as food and water supply or hospitals. Some detractors claim that documenting these transgressions is a political act that violates medical neutrality. However, as we discuss in our paper, it is well established within humanitarian ethical frameworks that not only does this documentation not violate neutrality, it actually fulfills the ethical obligation of témoignage, or bearing witness. In other words, humanitarian surgeons are obligated to speak out about violations of law and human rights they witness. Thus, reporting attacks on civilians or targeted destruction of hospitals is not political, but rather our ethical obligation to uphold justice. Justice, as you know, is a core principle of medical ethics. It requires accountability for harms and restoration of equal rights. As trauma surgeons committed to injury prevention, we cannot separate the prevention of war-related injuries from our professional duties. Speaking out against systematic violations of international humanitarian law is not politics. It's advocacy for our patients.
Hi, my name is Feroze Sidhwa. I'm a trauma, critical care, and general surgeon in California. Surgical care in conflict, be it war, genocide, or anything else, frequently requires surgeons and other healthcare providers to refocus their efforts. Normally, we provide the maximum benefit to the patient in front of us, but in situations of armed conflict and major societal disruption, in order to do the most good for the greatest number of people, we often have to move to triage. Now, there are frameworks for how to build systems that do this. For example, example, Stanford's group has one, the World Health Organization has another. But despite these frameworks existing, humanitarian missions still suffer from serious failings that we chunked into 7 common pitfalls in our article. Creating and then leaving behind unsustainable situations, use of inappropriate technologies, failure to collaborate with local healthcare workers and healthcare systems, lacking follow-up plans both for individual patients and for the healthcare system as a whole, letting secondary goals overshadow service, working without the support of the local population or healthcare providers, and having motives that are misaligned with local healthcare authorities or providers. Surgeons often also find themselves woefully unprepared to make extremely challenging and often ethically ambiguous triage decisions. It's often impossible to save everybody, as is the nature of mass casualty, and the necessity of properly done, well-informed trauma palliative care cannot be overemphasized. However, no mandatory standards for pre-deployment training or even reading exist to this issue, which leaves well-intentioned and well-meaning surgeons and other healthcare providers quite unprepared for the challenges they'll face in these situations.
Hello, I'm Andrew Bernard, Professor of Surgery at the University of Kentucky. As we consider this important paper now, and we look forward, consider that our surgical societies and trauma organizations have a real opportunity to advocate against armed conflict. All of our trauma organizations make injury prevention a priority. Given the global scale of armed conflict and the humanitarian impact, it's only appropriate that we include advocacy against armed conflict as part of those injury prevention efforts. We mustn't abdicate responsibility. We mustn't accept the unacceptable. Every day, overwhelming surgical need is being created as hospitals are being bombed, healthcare workers are being targeted, and innocent civilians are being significantly impacted by armed conflict. Our organizations have a unique platform and a powerful opportunity to advocate for peace.